Starting this afternoon, we have our session titled Enterprise Digital Transformation, Proven Strategies for Success at Scale. I'm joined by Erik Mirandette, Chief Business Officer at Tulip, Marius Schmiedt, Head of Operational Excellence at DMG Mori, and Audrey Van De Castle, Senior Director of Operational Excellence and Technology at Stanley Black Decker. And I'll kick it over to Erik to get us started.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. So we've got a pretty interesting discussion planned. These are two folks who are, many folks here are kind of in the earlier stages of thinking about how they're going to take on this challenge. Maybe you're just getting started, maybe a year or two in. These folks have, they've been living this for quite a while now, and they've got a ton of lessons learned. And we were talking last week and then, over dinner a little bit last night. I think they've got some really interesting perspectives to share. So that's what we hope to get into today. We're going to spend about 45 minutes or so with some discussion, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So, and I would even go so far. We're not such a big crowd. If you have pressing challenges or questions halfway through and you want to jump in, raise a hand and come on in. We'll make it more of a discussion than just a presentation. The good news is we have no slides for you other than this one. So you've been spared more PowerPoint. Okay, well, other than this one. This is the last one, I think.
There more?
I think that's the last one. So look, why don't we start things off? You heard a brief intro on who we are and where we're coming from, but I'm wondering, maybe to kick things off, maybe we just start by going a level deeper. So, what does this mean to be head of operational excellence for DMG Mori? And maybe first start with where you are in this journey and kind of scope of responsibility and what that actually means beyond just the title description. Maybe Marius, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name Marius Schmiedt from DMG Mori. Who doesn't know DMG Mori? We're a world-leading tooling machine producer, so CNC turning and milling machines, also advanced technologies, service, spare parts on top. So whoever is working in discrete manufacturing might have heard our name. We're a mix of a European and Japanese company, so formerly known as DMG, Deckelmau Gildemeister and Moriseki. Since 2009, we're together on that path, and I'm in my role supporting our European factories and sites on topics around operational excellence. What does it mean? It means on the one hand, I always say classical, already existing topics like continuous improvement, idea management, process improvement, and our internal processes. But on the other hand, also asking the question, how do we apply new tools, like digital tools, into our own value chain? And in this role, I'm supporting our 8 production sites in Europe, plus 1 in China.
And Audrey, how about you?
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Audrey Van De Castle. I lead our Operational Excellence Technology team, which is part of our broader OpEx organization, really focused on how do we take a lot of the lean standards and principles that we want our sites to follow and implement them digitally, enable them digitally. So a lot of my team's work is founded in sort of those lean best practices. We have 100 facilities globally. I'd love to say that I'm working with every single one of them. I'll get there one day, but we probably have a 50% coverage, maybe a little less with Tulip in those facilities, and then really robust implementations, probably in 24 or so. My team's focus has been really this past year on standardizing that whole stack from connectivity all the way through to the interface of the operator and the analytics that we can put on top of those. So really focused on those standard tools that we can give to all of our sites to hit scale, because 100 sites, 600 sites is the daunting task for any team, but looking at how we can make that easier and for our sites this year.
So that, I think that kind of opens up an interesting conversation. So you guys, you've been with Tulip for a little while.
Like 5 years at least.
5 years.
Maybe even more.
And
I think 5 years ago, we were in Bielefeld in the first training together.
Yeah, 5 years ago, I think to the day, actually.
More or less, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so 5 years ago to the day, I think Marius and I were leading a Train the Trainer event, which this is going to be slight spoiler alert. The question is going to be, how did he approach implementation? I remember, I was there. But we did a Train the Trainer event. But let's go back to that moment. Let's go back to when this journey started, because Tulip was a much younger company then. You guys made an early decision to embrace a lot of the concepts that we're talking about here at this Ops Calling conference around composability and citizen development and no code and agile manufacturing, but agile employing technology in an agile way to support a continuously improving operation, a constantly changing operation, which if we go back 5 years ago, I think it was less obvious that that was the right way to do it, right? So you guys were really kind of leaders in this space. Like, let's go back to that time when you were just getting started, and if you could, we're going to dig into this a little bit more, but maybe walk us through like the then to now. So, you know, we got started. How do we get started, and then kind of where are we today? And you gave us a little bit of a sneak preview, Audrey, but let's talk about how we think about these apps.
You know, I think when we started with Tulip, we had kind of started with the typical out-of-the-box use case with Tulip work instructions, right? Which I'm like, wow, there's so many other more impactful use cases that we can get at with Tulip, right? But we also kind of had a couple work streams within SBD on more monolithic MES type solutions, right? And none of them have been sticky, as evidenced by the fact that none of them really are in our plans anymore, and Tulip is, right? So we kind of started small. We kind of started like, hey, everybody want to come use this platform? Come use this platform. It's fine. And since then, we've really ramped up our governance and controls. Can talk a little bit more about that later on. But I think because of the complexity of our network, we have 100 sites, like I mentioned. Under the Stanley Black Decker umbrella, we've got a boatload of brands: DeWalt, Craftsman, Porter Cable, Lennox, Irwin, Mac Tools. That's just a slice of them, right? So we have a whole bunch of different processes in our plants, a whole bunch of different types and scales of plants, right? We've got plants that are like 100-person mom and pop fab shops, and then we've got 8,000-person assembly plants in Mexico, right? So how do you possibly have a one-size-fits-all solution for that type of environment? We really had to think and tailor our approach strategically and evolve it to make it more in line with how our network was, right? We can't just take an approach where everybody gets this one thing, but how can we have a solution that's flexible enough and that we can let people in that maybe don't have the expertise or the coding ability because we can't possibly do it right for you. And that's kind of how our strategy with Tulip has evolved is how do we make this the foundation standard and then empower our sites to kind of build from there for what works for them and their processes.
Yeah. This is one thing I have these conversations a lot, right, where I hear, like, look, we want to standardize our solution across our enterprise. I say, well, the problem with that is that your enterprise isn't standardized, and it's really hard to standardize at the solution level. That's not to say you can't do it, and that's not to say that there aren't solutions for which that's appropriate. But generally speaking, there's not a ton of them. And I sort of start with two kind of first principles here when I think about the nature of these operations. The first is that all of these operations, they're all unique. They're all a little bit different, every shop floor. And then the second being that they are dynamic environments that are constantly evolving. So it's challenging, and we talk about concepts like composability and citizen development. And by the way, neither of these are like silver bullet, one size fits all, just do that and you're good. There's actually quite a bit of nuance associated with it. And even then, there's challenges working through any approach that you take. But I think an important point here, at least from my perspective, is that it's really hard to standardize at the solution level. You can standardize at the architecture level. You can say, hey, look, we don't know exactly every last little bit here, but we can say this is the environment in which we're going to be taking on these problems. And when you do that, interesting things start to happen. You start to see best practices emerge that do have applicability in these other sites with minimal, configuration changes. And it's kind of an interesting approach to the problem. Marius, I think like if I go back to the 5 years ago, when we were just kicking things off at the first Train the Trainer event, I don't think we, as an industry and certainly individually, understood the problem as well as we do today. But we did have intuition that was, I think, pulling us in this direction. Well, how has things changed in DMG Mori between that first event, and maybe walk the team through how you approached implementing Tulip kind of in that beginning up through present?
Yeah, totally. So maybe one remark to what you said before. I think whenever you start digitizing, the solution will not heal your process variability. Yeah, so if you believe that the tool will solve your process harmonization discussion, you fail, you're wrong. Yeah? It's like, this needs to be a separate discussion and you need to involve the right people for that. Yeah? So this maybe we can pick up later, and this is where we are today also. But because we basically took the tool as like a vehicle to start this journey. And when we look back then, we were everybody had one common problem. There was paper on the shop floor, intransparency, and like no strategy. How do we want to digitize our shop floors? And in our case, on the European side, we have, based on our history, because it was different individual companies that were acquired together to one entire company. But of course, you keep different processes because in our case, the factories have different products, they have different cultures, they have different capabilities, they serve sometimes even different customers. So you cannot say, I do the same thing everywhere. This might work. I mean, you need certain approaches to the outside world, to customers, to suppliers. But the more you get to the real value stream and where the value is being created, the more you start discovering these differences. And this is why we said, okay, but we need a common approach. And that was Tulip at that time. So what we did is we said, okay, guys from factories, you come together. Guys from the IT, very important remark, number one, involve them from the beginning, come together. In Germany, guys from the from the worker council, come together. Don't know how it's here, but that was the number two. And we started training. We said, okay, we're going to start a journey. And that was, I think, that was the message that we didn't say, okay, look, we teach you how it goes. This was like, we need you to be part of this journey, and we give you a tool. It's like, we teach you how to use a compass. We teach you how to use the map. We teach you how to read the stars also, But you need to walk there, and you need to find the way. And I think this was important. And because afterwards, after this first training, we said, okay, this is the tool. You go back to your factories. You know your problems best. Start solving them with the tool. And what started by then was that, and this is, it's pro and con. You can argue, I want more centralized, decentralized, citizen development, standardization, central governance. There is no right or wrong. You need to find your way. But we said, take the tool, start your journey. What happened? That suddenly people came, and we maintained the network, but people came and say, look, I want the app from the other factory, but looks different. That's not good. Can't we do a common design? It's like, because in Tulip, of course, you can do whatever you want. So we started building a design guide. Number one. Suddenly people said, they have a similar problem than we do. Can't we do this together? And in our past, we were not collaborating too much on operations level. So suddenly people started talking to each other because they wanted, not because they were obliged by management decision. And that was like a really positive atmosphere coming up. So they were innovating together, even on processes. So over the time, we invited more factories to come, more units to come. Like suddenly the service department came like, we heard that you have this tool. Can't we also not use it? Yeah, of course. Get a training, join the journey. And then you start doing things like, we need to connect the ERP system. We need to connect to whichever system. We need the M365 connectors and whatnot. And we need to ensure compliance. But at some point and this is where we're today, you have an environment on the European side where we have 14 unit sites, we call them, that are using this tool and that have implemented applications. In our case, quite decentral.
And so it sounds like a little bit of a sort of parallels between the two approaches. You're saying, hey, look, we have this environment, come on, come all, do what you want, sort of decentralized. For you, it was, we started a little bit more structured, but it almost like was almost like a central effort, but it quickly snowballed, and then you quickly decentralized. Now, if we fast forward, here we are. That was then. Here we are now. One of the questions that I hear a lot is, look, is it top down? Is it bottom up? Is it like, does citizen development solve all the problems of operations? On the other hand, at the same time, you could say citizen development is like unfettered chaos. Like, how does that, like everyone's just doing anything, no one's in control of anything. And there's not Marius, you said it, there's not a right or wrong answer here. The question is, what makes sense? But from your perspectives, from where you are on the journey now, if you were to do it again, if you were to think about, and I'm not asking, we're going to talk about lessons learned here, but I'm curious to hear your perspective on like the top-down approach versus the bottom-up approach as it relates to this concept of composability. And I'd just like to hear your perspective on that. And maybe Audrey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think you need both, in my opinion. Tops down is really good for expectation setting, standard setting. It's really helpful if I can go into a plant and say, big boss said so, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't really win you many friends,
Yeah.
right? But I think you spoke about it really well, is how you had this kind of grassroots development and problem solving that happened when you empowered people with this tool. So that bottoms up approach is also really critical to get that buy-in and that cultural adoption. I have tons of conversations with our site champions and our sites who, they're so excited about the digital tools and the dashboards and the data that we're getting them. And I'm like, we did all that work. We gave you guys the tools. You have the hard work to do around the adoption and the culture change that we can't do for you, right? But I think that by giving people some of that ownership when it feels bottoms up, right? Hey, yeah, you have to use this platform. You have to be looking at these KPIs. We'll work with you to make it fit your processes and your operations. Gives them some ownership and skin in the game that I think is really valuable to sustained transformational change, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just checking a box because corporate's here, and then when they leave, they keep going back to paper, right? So you have to hit it from both sides, in my experience, for it to really, to get the capital support from the top, the expectation set from the top,
Yeah.
but then the support on the ground is absolutely critical for
Yeah.
sustainment.
Because to add on that, because I think there is no blueprint, and that's the critical point why you need the top management support. You will do mistakes and you will face situations where you think, okay, that was not good, we need to pivot. And if you just do bottom up and you say, okay, people will decide, they will find reasons why they do not have time, why they don't want to standardize, why whatever. But I think you need a guiding, like some guidelines from the top that make it very clear. There is one direction, this is digital transformation. I mean, you need to see, do we start with like digitization or digital transformation even? Because maybe sometimes step one, step two. But people need to understand that, and the organizations need to understand that. And this involves not only the people on the shop floor, but this involves the middle management and also sometimes like managing directors from factories, because they're busy with many, many other things. And suddenly you come, you say, hey, we're doing no-code platform, digital transformation, we need people, we need resources, join the party. And they're like, no, I need to deliver machines. And I think there will always be tension. So you need certain initial motivation. I think top-down helps there. But then, and I think this is what you said, you need some bottom-up involvement, because people from the shop floor, they will see there is a value, I can solve my problems. And if they report this to the middle management, top management, like managing directors, suddenly they will say, hey, I get something for me. Yeah, this is what this morning Daniela was maybe referring to, this value. Like people will see there is value, so I'll join too.
But let's go. I want to challenge you to go one. Like, let's get more specific. How do you think about, like, you're rolling this out, you're starting to scale this out. What does the resourcing look like? I mean, when we say, are these folks who, they're process engineers and operations, and that's their day job, but they're picking this up as like an additional duty, like a nights and weekends project? Is it an additional duty, or does it start to supplant the work that they're doing within their role? Or do you think about, are you creating new roles to work with the sites? How are you thinking about like staffing and structure of this?
I think I get the question a lot, like around my own team structure. So let me share that, how our team is structured, our central COE. We've got a bucket of controls and infrastructure folks really focused on connecting assets, getting data from our assets, making sure our assets can give us what we need upstream. We've got an application team that's really focused on the interfaces. I have a data team as well, and a TMO, a transformation management office, because I think it's really important to have people that are actually making sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? And then within the sites, it really looks super different depending on the site and what we're doing there, right? So a lot of the times, our site champions will be, let's say we're going to implement our SPC application. It's going to be a quality engineer or quality manager, right? And usually those folks have a little bit more bandwidth than your typical like operator on the floor. So they see how easy Tulip is, and they're like, oh, I could also build this in it. I could also build an audit app in this, right? And you kind of get them hooked that way, and it doesn't become like a nights and weekends job. It just becomes a tool that they use in their job, right? Instead of Excel, or instead of a PowerPoint, or instead of a Smartsheet,
Yeah.
they're going to use Tulip, right? But then in some of our more heavy-handed engagements where we're doing, implementing a ton of stuff on the plant floor, typically our champions are CI folks. So CI engineers, CI managers, CI being continuous improvement, right? Because those folks kind of have the charter already to improve things. They're already kind of digital minded in the most part, right? And so we see a lot of the times that population really grasping and championing our solutions in a site and then becoming familiar with it through that, or working with our team to build something custom for their site.
Okay. What about at DMG Mori?
I think we're quite an interesting animal, so to say, because you basically see two approaches. One is the European side, and the other is what our colleagues on the Japanese side do. And there's also one very good colleague here, Aoki-san. And so basically, we can learn from each other, and I think this is good. What do I mean? That the approach that I described before, we have chosen a very decentral approach. This means that we have trained app builders. This can be from quality departments, CI departments, like work preparation technology departments, operators, and they will staff the people like on demand. Yeah? So this is kind of, we say it's classical process improvement work that we do, just the tool is another. Yeah? It's Tulip, it's not that you do another, classic tool for solution. So they do the work, but then you need to see who maintains this, who operates that, who takes care of further versioning, because that's then what pops up. I mean, people are like happy to build an application, and it's interesting, it's fun, it's whatever, and then after 2 years, people evolve in the company or even leave the company or whatever, and you ask, okay, who can take over? So you need to fix that too. Centrally, we have only like orchestrating resources. That's me and a colleague. And besides that, we have existing parts of the organization from IT on the one hand, which is taking care of our IT landscape, end-to-end platforms. But also we have like a business process management team. And you see that like we have many people that we need to involve to, at the end of the day, come to the conclusion we want to use something for a standard. Many people to involve when it comes to what have we already as solutions in place when we want to discuss like a future process standardization. And on the other hand, when you look to Japan, the colleagues, they have a slightly different factory structure. This is why most likely it was also let's say the natural choice. They have like one big lead factory, and this lead factory has a dedicated team to build apps and to operate them. And we see that they have, let's say, much more consistency and power also to bring the things to the shop floor because you have dedicated resources. Absolutely. And this is what we see on the European side. If there is a special topic where also deciders commit resources to, we're getting fast. If there is no special topic, they kind of pull back the resources and they would kind of steer that on demand. And our colleagues, they are, let's say, more continuously working on bringing that to the shop floor.
I think in our sites that we have like the most ingrained adoption, they have citizen developers in the sites, right? Whether they're to our standard or not, having someone there who really knows and understands the platform is the deal breaker for me, right? We can give you an app, but it might not scale anywhere past that if you don't have anyone who's kind of looking at or excited about that type of work, right? So I think citizen development is a huge enabler for scale.
But having said that, I think this is, when you talk about digital transformation, it's not just technology. And if you say it's an add-on hobby or job or whatever, where you say, okay, you can do Tulip if you add the 2 hours per day, or you come on Saturdays or whatever, this will not work. Yeah, then you talk about digitization, because this is like, okay, can you digitize my paper process into something digital? Check, done, ready. But if you want to transform, you also, and we heard it this morning quite a lot, we need to transform the organization. And this implies to dedicate resources to build up capabilities that can do that. Yeah. And this is what I think it's really important, that what many do not see, they think like, okay, I use Tulip now and it's fun, people are committed, but nobody has the time. And this will fail, absolutely. So you will find yourself at some point with the fragmented pieces, maybe some standards, but if nobody joins the party, there's no party,
I hear this all the time, and I frankly, I see both models, right? I see, I see even in the audience, to be frank, I see roles that did not exist a few years ago, roles that have come into existence because there's a need to help drive this kind of standardization across the environment and lead these initiatives. And these are like specific roles. And I follow job boards pretty closely. I follow LinkedIn pretty closely. There's a lot of activity on our community to this effect. And I think increasingly I'm seeing this come up like, we are looking for somebody who has experience deploying Tulip at scale within an enterprise, because that's the job. And it goes by many names. Sometimes it's a digital transformation architect. Sometimes it's like a senior MES lead, and you have to go down to the second line and look at, like experience with Tulip required. Like you see these types of things coming up more and more, and that falls into one category, which is like there is a new sort of job emerging that, frankly, I think people that are at this conference, and some of whom are in this room, are like helping define for the industry. On the one hand, on the second hand, I talk with IT departments all the time, and one of the concerns that often comes up when we talk about Tulip versus more of a traditional MES implementation mindset is like, I don't want operations to just be building software. I don't want shadow IT. I don't want people just like citizen developing applications, whatever they want with no control. And like, there's this like, I feel like there's this, we're in Boston. You guys all saw Good Will Hunting, right? Everybody knows that reference. Like, when Matt Damon's like, he's like, it's not your fault. I feel like we have to have this like breakthrough moment at times when I'm like, they're like, but people can't be citizen developing their own software. I'm like, but they already are. And they're like, no, they're not. And I'm like, but they are. And they're like, no, they're not. But they are. And they're like, okay, fine. Now we can work through this. It's called Excel. It's called paper-based forms. It's called like the grease boards at the end of the line. It's called the Teams channel that you started. It's called it takes many different forms, but like this is happening, and it's happening right now. And this is how operations runs. It's not a matter of saying we're giving people power that they didn't have before. It's a matter of accepting that they already have this power and agreeing to work together transparently through these types of issues. And I think like maybe on that theme, we were having dinner last night, and I think I always sort of have this mental list of like the most ridiculous Tulip solutions I've ever heard of. And I think I've got a new first place. But I think it's a good example that illustrates the tension between this top-down mindset, like the system shall do X, and we've got 482 requirements that, once we satisfy all of these, it's the perfect solution. We'll implement it and everything will be great. We'll all live happily ever after. Versus this like, lots of stuff, there's a lot of unknowns, and we're dealing with like limited information here. And it's so interesting, right? Because when you think about like top-down implementation, these are problems that you don't know need to be solved when you start these things out, right? And so I think when you're making these types of architecture decisions, like making sure that you have the scalable, that you're picking the right tools, not nailing down the specific specs of the application, right?
To add on that, I think this is maybe the discussion top-down versus bottom-up. It's always a field of tension, because you're afraid that if you allow bottom-up, IT, or I have sometimes discussion with prospects or other customers, and they're like, yeah, but I'm afraid I will end up like in an uncontrollable environment of apps. And it's like, well, first you can technically control it, and it doesn't matter which platform you use, but you should build it like that, because then you avoid this shadow IT, which is existing today. And two, there is creativity outside there, and this is what we need to understand. And we were talking about democratization. Nathan talked about like breaking up this blue collar, white collar mindset, which is right, and that everybody's a knowledge worker, and so. And you go out and suddenly you find people on the shop floor that in their free time they build iOS apps also. You just don't know, and it's like there is so much potential. First, that could build that, and second, they know the problems best. So what is the reason why I should stop that and prohibit that? Yeah. There is no reason. The only way is you need to set the right guidelines. And once you have done this, and this is, I think, the example there, maybe you get new app builders, maybe people want to join that journey, but I need to enable them first to use the platform to stay compliant, and then I need to involve them in further development. I think this is the big challenge. It's not to build an application, it's then to really get them on board and change the organization, communication, and further development.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on time here, but I want to open it up for questions. But maybe a couple lessons learned. If you were in the audience today and you were where you were 5 years ago, or just getting ready to start this journey, what advice, lessons learned, wisdom do you have to pass on to folks?
Implement SSO from the get-go.
That's true. That's very specific.
Set standards for tables from the get-go.
Yeah.
Try to convince IT that you don't have to have an instance per site like we have. And on the IT topic, I think bring IT along with you for the ride. You're going to go much farther if they're partners than if they're someone you're fighting against. We spent the past 2 years kind of building that relationship with IT, and I talk to our IT partners every day, all day, and they go to the plants with me. They're in the weeds with my team, right? They're fixing the problems as they pop up. We literally couldn't do it without IT, so I think build that bridge with IT from the get-go sets you up for success.
I mean, agree to all the mentioned ones. Especially, I mean, SSO took us quite long to change that. I mean, you also need to see 5 years ago, Tulip was it had another maturity, right? So today you would do things differently. The data model guideline, at least. I mean, if we would know this composable approach with the model, I mean, if you talk to people from IT, they would say, yeah, I could have told you 5 years ago, maybe. But I was alone, I was like, okay. How does business do today? They do what they think is best, and they do already do that. So, but that's something I think from the get-go you should do better. And we are on the journey. You will have, and we had a lot of moments where the organization has other focus. For example, suddenly there is an ERP go live. The whole organization doesn't care about anything. It's like survival mode. Yeah. This is like the only way is we need to get material from a supplier to us, to the assembly, and the machine to the customer to send an invoice. Everything else is kind of stopped. So the risk for anything that you do on digital transformation, and Tulip is like it's a vehicle to run this digital transformation. The challenge is how do you ensure like a modus to work continuously, even in such difficult times. And this can be special projects, this can be bad order intake, this can be whatnot, yeah. But that's what I meant is like if you keep it as a hobby, well, if at the end of the month you don't have money in your pocket, well, then you don't go, I don't know, you don't go shopping, yeah, well, that's what it is, but shopping is a hobby. But if you have a certain process established with certain resources that will take care of that, you ensure that you can run that also ongoing.
All right, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. I have a bunch more if you don't, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Yeah, Rob?
I'm just curious, how are you continually training new employees when they come on board with Tulip, and how are you training employees on changes that Tulip can?
Maybe so. For us, the one key challenge is language. So we have sites in Germany, Italy, Poland, China, Japan, the States, and well, our sales and service offices are like in every country there is one. And whenever you talk about training in an ideal world, they can get a training in the language. What we have done, especially in the beginning, is the initial trainings were in English language. We have then produced German training material to do, because it matched quite well with the COVID pandemic. So we didn't have chance to meet in rooms anymore. So we had to do trainings online. So it was German training. And today we're doing this. So if somebody new joins the Tulip journey, they would get like an online training. This can be either the Tulip University or our internal training material. They were quite flexible. We don't care so much. And second question was about how to get them up with the latest features, for example, right? Yeah. So we have an internal. So everybody who gets through this training joins a Microsoft Teams, which is dedicated to our internal Tulip implementation. And there, for example, we're publishing release notes, we're commenting on them, we're offering a weekly office hour for everybody. So there's an open link where anybody who sees that can just enter and ask the question on app building, on new features. And meanwhile, Tulip is running certain webinars on new features. And we're also, they are online, so you can watch them on demand. So we're trying to also push that to the people. Yeah. Challenge is always language for us.
We have a similar approach. We send people through Tulip University, right? I love to have people show a completion of certificate completion before they get a certain permission level. We also partner really closely with Tulip, so we have specific sites where we'll actually send people from Tulip to work with the sites and help build that citizen developer capability. And then similar to you, we have like an internal kind of page on Workplace, which is like our internal Facebook, where we just post about new Tulip features. We have Ask an Expert sessions. We just kind of started those back up last month for people to drop in. And we pull we look at our data and look at admin hours in Tulip to help identify people who are maybe in the system building that aren't on our radars yet, so that we can email them, make sure they're aware of stuff, and have that kind of distribution list made up from that analysis that we do. Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of. That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a really good.
But that's true. Whenever IT says you will end up in a mess, it's like, no, you can see it.
Yeah.
Transparency, and I think that's the difference to any other micro PC web app that is built locally. You don't see that.
Yeah. Sometimes some would say ignorance is bliss.
IT would definitely say that.
No, come on, be fair, be fair. They've got a tough job, and they do. All right, other questions?
You had mentioned that standardization of tables is something, an early lessons learned. So what are some advice, or what are some common elements between, let me ask this way. We've got a situation where we're starting to use it for batch records, we're using it for some calculations. We've got this new plant fills liquid, but there's a lot of opportunity there to use Tulip. So the question is, well, how do we make sure that any Tulip tables that we make still work for filling liquid here, for calculations there? Like, what are common elements for table setting?
For us, it was having like guiding KPIs from leadership, right? They want to see this KPI from every plant calculated the same way. So that makes it pretty easy for us that we can then break that down into what are the actual data components, SKU name, cycle time, that type of thing, that we know feed up into those standardized KPIs. And then on the machine data side, right, like having event formatting and all of that done in the same way across sites helps us kind of roll up globally. Because eventually, if you've got more than one site, you're going to get to the point where leadership's going to want to see that on a regional and global scale. So it behooves you to do it now to set up for that than try and back chase like we're doing some with our sites. So.
Can I also just add, I would say 3 years ago, 5 years ago, Tulip didn't have a strong opinion on what your default data model should be that connects your different applications. I think that's an area, when I look back, I think that's an area where we were wrong. IT, to Marius's point, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, would say, you do need to have an opinion here, and it's modeled after ISO 95, and it's this, that, and the other. And we were too quick, I think, to point to all the flaws and all the inconsistencies there and say, no, let's take an agnostic approach and see what emerges, right? I think actually, I think the industry would have benefited from us being more opinionated earlier than we were. We are opinionated now. We have our common, our composable MES in library for general manufacturing. We have one for life sciences as well that we announced this morning. That was a part of the keynote, which does have, like we say, look, these are the kinds of tables you have. This is the purpose they serve. Here's how they connect to the different, I'm going to use an antiquated term perhaps, not modules, but the different suites of applications, and they have predefined interactions, right? And here are all the fields, and here's the data types across all of these different fields. That's now coming to you out of the box, ready to use, and you're going to look at that and you're going to say, but it's not quite right. And we say, of course not, but it's mostly right, or it's at least a pretty good starting place, as opposed to say, well, let's just start from scratch and build it from the ground up.
Right.
So I think that that's really important as well. Like on the one hand, what are the KPIs you care about? On the other hand, it's like, but here's a structure to these different applications to use as a default, and then adjust. It's expected you would adjust, but adjust as necessary. Don't just start from scratch.
And maybe to add on, what you would, so in our case, as I described, we were quite decentralized. So you will find a similar app maybe in 3 different sites with a different data model. Is it bad? Yes. Could I have done different? Also yes. But the big advantage that I have today, I'm not having a theoretical discussion about which data items I maybe need or not, and I never come to a common data model. I can look, okay, we have 3 ones, which data items do you have? Let's try to standardize based on that. It's a very specific discussion. Everybody has a current opinion, has examples, and we're not trying to cover the edge of the edge of the edge case. And I think this is really helpful if you let it go. Sometimes you need to allow maybe some more freedom, then they can do something, but then you know which problems do they really want to solve and not what they might imagine what could happen next year on, I don't know, the 31st of October. Yeah?
But meanwhile, you're driving impact every step along the way, and you're doing this in parallel in ways that are probably locally optimized, right? And so you can kind of defer until you have more information and then try and bring them together, but not do that prematurely.
And you need to moderate this process. And this is what we really learned. It's not people haven't done that before. So, and the IT will not moderate that because they might say that's a business topic. The business will try it, but they do not have the experience. So you need to change your way of working together. And this is why the term transformation, I think it's quite suitable.
Yeah, it's important. And this is why the tension is good. If everyone agrees on somebody's being left out, right? That working through that tension is, I think, quite important. Let's go to a couple more questions if we have time. One more, yeah.
I was going to say, so to that tension question or point, Audrey, you had said that, make friends with IT. And so is this more of a plant IT, corporate IT? I'm sure centralization versus decentralization also comes into it. Where do you find those connect points, where that tension exists, and, what's your experience in mitigating that?
Sure. So we have an MSP in our plants right now, which has not been the most successful, I'll put it that way, especially when it comes to the OT
What's an
technology.
MSP?
What?
MSP, you said?
Managed service provider, outsourced IT in our plants. So we work really closely with our central IT team. It's an IT manufacturing team, and they don't necessarily, the MSP and the plants don't report up to them, but they respond really well to their central kind of governance and control, right? So we work really closely, our partners that I talk to every day, a central IT manufacturing team, who then can go to the smattering spider web of the IT organization that I don't know how to navigate as well, if we need help with someone in a plan, or if we need an architecture review, or if we need a privacy review, and they kind of are the central hub to help us get everything done and navigate the IT waters.
Time for one more, or are we?
One more.
All right, one more. He says one more.
So this question is for Audrey. So you explained how your team is set up from a corporate structure to the locals. How do you manage when you have someone locally who is excited and wants to build a business critical app, where it's going to directly interface with the ERP and the cash of the company and the source of truth? So how do you balance that? Because I know that's something we're aware about too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, we're in it, and we're trying to figure
Sure.
out how to best, I don't want to say curb it, but manage and govern.
Yeah.
That we're moving forward, but also not moving forward without.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think actually I saw Zach in here earlier. There's Zach, one of our citizen developers from one of our plants. So not actually on my team, but the same scenario that you just described, right? So a couple ways that we work with them. Number one, if it's a business critical application and I'm lucky enough to find out about it, that you're building it, then I am going to help you through what our IT team calls our tech pass process, which goes through a couple different checks and balances in IT around architecture, security, privacy, and looks at your application, your business case, what do you want to connect into, and puts it on record in the IT halls that this thing exists in our plants, right? And that it checks the boxes that we need it to check from an IT perspective, good to proceed, right? So number one, my team will help them navigate that. Number two, my team is working on building connection to Snowflake, which is our data lake, which is where we've been dumping a bunch of ERP data. So instead of our sites building one-off business critical connections right into SAP, just leverage our connection to Snowflake, pull the data that you need, and that simplifies it a little bit for them. So a lot of the times we'll kind of take that work on. We find that we don't always have back-end ERP experts in our plants. They just know what they need, what their problem is, where the data is, and where it needs to go. And so we'll kind of act as the grease to their gears to help make it actually work and pull in the right people from IT, pull in the right resources from my team who maybe know that back end a little bit better to make it work. So we also, another thing we just went live with this week was custom user roles. So we restrict their ability to do it, so they have to come to my team.
That was gonna be my next question.
Yes.
But and maybe to add on that, I think the roles and permission, that's number one, but then it's again the field of tangent, bottom up versus control, maybe do you want to allow the innovation of the people, and then you would say, okay, I put them in like any kind of development instance, but still if they need a connector to your ERP to test that, they can still like fire tons of requests to the ERP and like shut it down. So what I also think is important, even if I have my driver's license, I can go on the street, but like I need to understand why should I drive slow and why should I drive like responsible, right? And what does it mean to drive responsible, to look around? So it's just that the people got a training doesn't mean that they're aware of what they can cause. Yeah, I mean, if somebody's running on the street, I still need to brake if they're just, how is it, J crossing? It's like, it's not that I say, oh, but I have the right to continue. Of course, then I will cause the accident. So we had people that, but that's what it's like, okay, we had people that were creating like calls on the ERP system, and they shut down the ERP system of a factory because the triggers, time trigger was
I know.
30 seconds, then we took it to 1 second, and they were firing every second. So, but that happens if you're not aware of what you can cause. And I think this is like what I say about capabilities also. It's not that you give them the driver's license and you say, see you in, 5 years or so, or call me when you have a problem. That's not the way. I think we need to skill them up, make them aware, make them like responsible part of this digital transformation.
What I would say, in terms of what is our recommendation and best practices here, we talk about the partnership between IT and ops. Like, I can't understate how important that is. It is reckless to give people who understand their operations inside and out, but don't understand security vulnerabilities and the complexities of your infrastructure, the ability to directly transact with these things. Like that's reckless, And for us, what we typically would recommend as a best practice is if you're building something, and we have different charts and ways we think about the different visuals, but I think about citizen development versus like IT or central led across two sort of spectrums. The first is like, where are you as an organization? Are you doing a CFR 21 Part 11 validated thing, whereas if you get it wrong, the FDA is going to shut you down and everybody loses their business and people go to jail? Okay, so that's probably going to be over here more. Are you going to be building something that's like, we could throw, every couple days we throw some of this stuff away, nobody really cares, we're still sort of figuring it out, NPI startup land? Great, all good. You're probably closer over here on the more decentralized, agile side. But then also, you think about this like by use case and criticality of use case, and there's sort of another dimension to think about these things through. When you think about, and then we say, okay, like when we think about this on a per use case basis, how impactful is it? How challenging is it? And you would say, okay, it's super impactful, really easy to do, great. It's not that meaningful to the business, but it helps one person in the operation. It helps that every single day they struggle with this. You don't need the same level of control around all of these different use cases, and that's why it's important to take a very sort of nuanced approach to this. Like, what are you trying to do, and what's the appropriate level of governance, and who are you within the organization? How much responsibility should you have, a la custom roles and responsibilities that we shipped? So the point is, you really need to be partners with IT in this. Where we would typically draw the line is say, if you are doing something that impacts operations and only operations, that should live in operations, no doubt. If you're going to start transacting with the ERP, IT needs to be a part of that approval path, right? If you're doing something that is going to impact a validated line, guess what? Your qualified person in quality needs to be a part of that approval path. And we have mechanisms in the platform to allow for these different approval paths. What we as a vendor don't do is mandate one or the other, because we don't oftentimes appreciate the nuance associated with that specific use case, right? But this is an area where you can get in a lot of trouble if you're not careful and thoughtful about how you approach it. And sometimes I see people being like, woohoo, citizen development, and it's like, pump the brakes. Like, yes, but.
I really appreciate all those responses, because I think, as you mentioned that slide, we're kind of like in that middle realm.
Yeah.
And I know my team, we're trying not to be overly controlling.
Yeah.
Because we want citizens developers to be empowered. At the same time, we don't want to be in a reckless situation.
But
So I
Right.
really appreciate
you could set up workspace and say, okay, in one workspace without the connectors to the ERP, they can do citizen development. There's another one where the connector is released. You can play that a bit, and they feel like encouraged to do that. But once they want to go there, well, then they need to contact you.
Okay, I think we're at time here. Everyone, thanks for being a part of this discussion. Thanks also for the questions. We're going to hang around a little bit after the fact, so if there's more questions, we'll hang around up front. Other than that, I think you have just enough time to get to your next session. So thanks, everybody.